Now we know how to add variables and also add functions, and also modify variables and call functions. We want to see what we can do with those variables in those functions. So we're going to start looking at our conditions and what happens in our conditions, our operators. Let's go back to my script. I'm just going to clean up a little bit. We've covered some of the basics. Initialize variables. Leave a local variable example down there. That's our debug to show us we've reached the end of our start function. We have some comments here. You can see how to turn something into a comment by adding a double forward slash. And remove the double forward slash to bring it back. Okay, so that's just a little bit tidied up there. So we want to check some conditions of our variables, some conditional arguments. Now the first one you're going to see and learn is an if condition. Okay? If we check a condition, is that condition true or false? If so, do something. Do stuff. Not to confuse things. Okay, so what does that look like in code? So we want to check something. We want to check if something happens. We're going to check our condition here. And if our condition, whatever is in between these brackets, returns a true, we're going to do something. So what can we look at? We have my first integer. If my first integer, let's say we want to know if it is greater than our float. So I'm checking a condition. If my first integer is greater than my float. So if that is true, what are we going to do? But now let's just do another debug. My first integer is greater than my float. This will tell us that this condition returned true. So we fall into here. So we save that script, let it compile in Unity, and we'll hit play. So we're checking. Now, without any other debugs, we're not going to see much happening. But if we pause that and check our console, we see at first we're at the end of our start function, and then we see we're in our do something function. We keep adding 2 to our first integer in the do something function. Okay, at this point here, our do something function, the first integer became 13. Then we checked in our condition, is our first integer greater than what is our private, so we can't see that. Okay. I will make that public. I think I'll display public and private so you can see what's happening there. We'll make the other ones private because we're not using them. And we will use the Boolean. I'll show that in another condition. So let's just see what's happened to our public and our private variables here. After compile, so they're the 3 public global variables I want to check. Alright, so back to our condition. If my first integer becomes greater than my float, then tell us in a debug message. Let's just run that again. We'll clear. Play that. And hit pause. Go to the top. So here is my start function. Here is just calling the do something function and adding 2 to my first integer. Now here you see my first integer has reached 13. It has become greater than my float, which is 12. So indeed, 13 is greater than 12.34. So our condition is returning the expected result. That's comparing numbers. We can compare integers and floats in the same way. We can compare in another way. We can check if our integer is less than something. We can check if it's less than or equal to something. We can check if it is greater than or equal to something. We can check if it is absolutely equal to something. We can check if it is absolutely not equal to something. Now the exclamation mark is the symbol for not. What other conditionals did I mark on? Okay. Sometimes we can check for 2 conditions at once in a conditional. So if my first integer is not equal to my float, and my first integer is greater than my float, we are looking for 2 things to happen, and they both have to be true for the whole if condition to return true. So if my first integer is not equal to my float, yes, and my first integer is greater, if both of these say yes, then this is true. This condition is true, and this will print. Okay, so there's and. We can check for one or the other. We use the or symbol. That's just above the enter, and you need to shift for that. So now it's if my first integer is not equal to my float, or my first integer is greater. So if only one of these returns true, then this will be true. It doesn't need both with an or. It needs both with an and. But I suggest to start out, just use a single conditional check. We want to know if something is equal to, if it's not equal to, if it's greater than and equal to, if it's less than or equal to, or of course just greater than or less than. Okay, so that's comparing integers and floats. So that's numbers, that's quite easy. What if we're going to compare a string? That's something quite different. If, well, not something quite so different. It's the same thing, but you just have to remember with strings you're dealing with characters, not numbers. If my string is equal to so we can check if our string is equal to a certain string value, which is encapsulated in our speech marks. We'll send a message to say that it was. Now let's try and change that. Let's say my string now equals goodbye. So we've also changed the value of our string if this is true. Now if you look, do something is called every update. So this will be called every update. But you can imagine, the first time do something is called, my string is set to high there, if it is like it is at the top. We'll get a debug, but then that will change. Okay, we should see that in the inspector. Now I want to see that in the inspector, so look, let's make the string also a public. Okay, back to the public and private variables. Save that script. Check Unity for compilation errors. Let's see if those new conditions are working. We're watching my string. Play. Okay, hi there. Why is that not changing? Ah, my first mistake. When we are modifying a value, we're not checking for a condition. Okay? We're just stating something. So if we want to make something equal something, we just outright say this equals this. We're not checking is it equal to, we're saying no, it equals this. So there we go. So first, problem solving. Let's stop that. Clear. It's compiled. Try that again. So checking my string. Pause that. So the first time we called do something. Hi there. So at that point in time, my string did equal hi there because it was initialized as hi there. But then we changed it. We changed it to goodbye, and we can see this in the inspector. See, my string has been changed to goodbye. So this will be the only time hi there will be in our debug. Okay. So there's looking at some starts of conditionals, and that is the if condition. We're checking for a condition if it exists. If that happens, if that is so, if it is true or false, then do something. Okay, while we're working on ifs, let's work on the final type of variable that we have declared, the Boolean. Now we know the Boolean is going to hold two states. It is going to either be equal to true, or the Boolean is going to be equal to false. Okay? Now, I'm going to write two examples here. This is just very poor coding, but I just want to show something. If my Boolean is equal to true, this can also be written as if my Boolean. Okay? This is automatically saying, is this true? If my Boolean is true, because remember our condition is looking for a true or false. So Boolean can work with a true or false very quickly. So if my Boolean is the same as writing if my Boolean is equal to true. Okay. If we look at the other side of that coin, if my Boolean is equal to false, what would be the shorthand version of that seen in many scripts? Okay, if my Boolean is equal to false, we're looking if it's not true. Okay, so this says if my Boolean is true, if my Boolean is not true. Okay, remember that exclamation mark means not. So these will give the same. This is true, this is true. This is false, this is false. Okay, we can check this. You see, I often set up my brackets before I fill in my content, so I know where my beginnings and my ends are. Okay, so we can ask it to tell us my Boolean is, what is it? Now we could type true in here because we know it should only be true if we fall in here. We can also tell the debugger to just outright return it. Okay, so you see, if it's true, it will say my Boolean is plus return the state, which should be true. If false, my Boolean is false. Let's just put it in false conditional. That way we can see there's going to be a difference between the two debugs. Alright, so I'm going to save that and I'm going to run that out. Of course, stop your project, let it compile, clear your console. Let's see what happens. We'll see, my Boolean is true. Now let's check that. Sure enough, my Boolean is true. Now let's just turn that to false. There we go. The if conditional in this the false conditional. My Boolean is now false. Let's double check that. We can double click on that, take us straight to the line. And so it seems to be happening. When we toggled my Boolean to false, it fell into here. It gave us the longer thing. Okay, so there are three methods of using a conditional check, using if, and on different types of variables, how you can check different types of variables. Now, as I said, there's all these different types of operators, and I probably should post these there somewhere because I don't have a clear reference link to show you what all these operators are. So I will write the meanings and post them somewhere. Something like is equal to, is not equal to, and all. I will pop these up for everyone to read and reference from. Okay, so let's check what else we have. I won't jump into the for loop just yet. While we're working on ifs, you see I have an if here. Just checking for two conditions of a Boolean. Now we can even shorthand this out. So let's delete half of this. We can say if my Boolean returns true, do all this, else do this. So let's just work through the logic. If my Boolean is true, I'm going to do this, or else my Boolean is not true. That's the only way we will fall down here into this part of the script. Okay, so if my Boolean is true here, else my Boolean is false. Give us this. Let's see if it's exactly the same as the result as before. Of course, let it compile, clear the console. It should stop your project first, but I'm cross-checking so many times here. Okay, so we have my Boolean is true. Toggle that. We're falling into the conditional that is proving that our Boolean is false. So we'll stop that. So we have if something is returning true, else if that something is not returning true, do this. So do one thing or the other based on our condition. Okay? And of course the same goes for integers and other things. Now you can start chaining else ifs. I think I'll use the integer value for this. So I'm going to check our integer first of all. So if my first integer is less than 10, debug log my first integer under 10. Okay, so what if that's not true? What if it's grown above 10? Else, if my first integer is less than 20, do something else. So let's just quickly check the logic. If my first integer is less than 10, this condition check is true. So this will happen. If this is not true, we're going to fall straight past that. We're going to jump to this check. If this condition, if my first 10, if that is true, we're going to fall straight to here. My first under 20. As I said, you can keep stringing these, but this is where things start to get really messy, and it's really not good coding practice. If my first integer is less than 100, first integer getting bigger. Okay, so finally we can cap out if all of these conditions are checked, and if all these conditions are false, we can define an overall action. Else, none of the above is true. First integer is really big now. Big now. So here's how we can use a string of if and else if to check different conditions and then segregate them. So if this condition is not met, we can give it another option. Alright, so we save that script, let it compile, clear the console. We'll hit play. Okay, so there's a lot of other debugs in there that are in our way at the moment. First of all, just do something. And we know it's counting, so we can now comment this out. Comment that, save that. Because we've made changes to our script, of course we let it compile. Stop it, we clear it, we start again. Here we go. So let's check and see what was happening through all those ifs, all those conditionals. Here we are at the start function. We're checking for if our first integer is greater than our float. And here we are down to the next part. My first integer is under 10 at this point in time. We're counting, it's still low. Look, it's under 10. Okay, now we've fallen out of that. It's gotten bigger. It's now under 20. So you see, this if is happening. At some point in time, my first integer was larger than 10. But when we checked here, it was still less than 20. So we got this debug. So as we scroll on down, it's still 20. It's being added to. Now we start to see it's getting bigger. So where was that happening? Double click on that. Here we are. At some point in time, my first integer became greater than 20. So this is false. So we skipped past here. We jumped to here and we checked. This became true. This condition happened. So then we got this message. Okay, and then finally getting down, bigger. Did I pause it? Is really big now. And at this point in time, all these conditions returned false. So we've said, okay, definitely do this. Alright, that was a bit long-winded, but I hope if you go slowly and also stop and pause and also look back, review some of the things I've been trying to describe, that it will start to come a little bit clear. I do have one more mention here for a different kind of condition. I don't know how to describe it, but it's something that you'll use a lot. And this is making your own loops. Where you want to check something over and over again until you're looking for something that is actually true. Let's even write a new function. So let's just call it run for loop. It's going to be a function. So let's declare and build that function. Function run the for loop. Not passing any information to it, and everything in our function runs between curly braces. So what are we going to check? We're going to create a loop. So we're going to for however long this condition. Okay, so forever how long, this is how we set it up. We create a local variable as a counter. This is the most common use of the loop. So we need a local variable. So we need a variable, and we usually use I or some other variable that's not used elsewhere in script. Especially don't use a global name. That's already been taken by the global variable when you declared it. So var I, this is going to be a counter, so it's going to be int, and that will start equaling at 0. So the start of our for condition, we create a variable and we set it to 0. And then we check if I is less than, let's give an arbitrary number of 10. So while I is less than 10, let's add 1 to I. Alright, so for our conditional, we want to loop. We're going to create a variable, which is a counter, starts at 0. We're going to keep checking, is that variable below 10? If it is, we're going to add to that variable, and we're also going to run our loop again. Okay, so what do we do in our loop to show that it's working? Let's try a debug log. So let's just find out what I is. Let's just watch this loop count and check itself in hand. I equals, let's ask it to return I. So let's save that. For every update, we are going to run a loop. We're going to call a function which is going to run a loop. So every update, we call this function. Now within this function, we're going to loop this 10 times. We're going to have a lot of information in the console. Again, let it compile, clear your console of old information. If you pause, stop, and start again. I'll pause that very quickly, and let's see what's happening in our console. So we have all the other checks and all the other debugs. I'll click comment out now. And now we're looking at our loop. I equals 0. And then we start counting. 2, 3, 4, 5. We get to 9. Now 9 is less than 10. We go to where that's printed out. certainly, so while 9 is less than 10, when we get to 10, that is equal to 10, so we have fallen out of the loop. Okay? So we could even debug there. Loop has ended. And the spelling is a little shocking. So let's just run that one more time and check this last conditional. So let's check that. We're getting every update, the function is called, and we run a loop. It counts through, is counting up while the loop is running. We get to 9. 9 is less than 10, but 10 is not less than 10, so then the loop has ended, because of the condition we have checked for. Alright, so I think I'm going to leave this one here and let everyone review and see where we're up to.